Well, good afternoon and welcome to H360 Live. My name is Dave Duplay, and joining me here in the studio this afternoon is my friend and colleague from Healthy h360, Miss Courtland Long. Well, Courtland, great to see you today.
Good to see you too, Dave. How are you?
I'm doing great. I love that scarf, by the way.
Thank
Very
you.
colorful today. I love it. You know, I'm on the day 10 of a 10-day juice cleanse, and I'm
Yes.
feeling really great.
You look amazing.
Well, thank you. You know, I'm doing Lizzie J's juice, and it is fantastic. For anybody thinking about doing a juice cleanse, you can find Lizzie J's in our perk section on healthyh360.com. Take advantage of the discount that she is offering to our Healthy h360 members. Well, Courtland, we have a great show today because Michael and Patty Singer are in, and we are going to be shining the light on male breast cancer. Michael is a male breast cancer survivor. We're going to hear all about that. And we met Michael down in San Antonio, Texas, late last year.
Yep.
At a Congress called SABCS, the San Antonio Breast Cancer Association. And, you know, we interviewed him. Courtland, you did a wonderful job interviewing Michael in San Antonio. And he had so much to say. And it's such an important topic because men have breasts too, and we want to shine the spotlight on that. We want to hear all about his story. But first, I want to share with you some statistics about male breast cancer that I think is really important. So here we go. Here are some stats. Over 2,500 men will be diagnosed this year with breast cancer. Over 400 men will die, unfortunately, of breast cancer this year. So not as prevalent as female breast cancer, but nonetheless, it's important, and that's why we're here today. I want to go through some of the risk factors with you. Family history, it's so important to know your family history. Get that down, talk to your family, understand it. Age certainly is a risk factor, as with most conditions, age is a risk factor. Elevated estrogen levels, be sure you're monitoring that. When you go to your doctor and they take that blood test, look at the estrogen levels. It's a risk factor. And of course, lifestyle factors as well. Alcohol, smoking, there's a lot of them. Be aware of those. Now, for symptoms and signs, listen up, this is really important. A lump that feels like a hard knot on your breast or under your arm could be a sign of male breast cancer. The skin or nipple irregularity, this is really important. If you see redness, scaling, or your nipple is secreting a discharge, that could also be a symptom or sign of male breast cancer. So pay attention to that. Now, survival rates, here we go. If it's diagnosed early at stage 1, 100%, not always guaranteed, but it is a great percentage. We're going to talk about early detection and saving life. So stage 1, 100%, stage 2, 91%, stage 3, 72%, and stage 4, 20%. Stage 4, more times than not, the cancer has spread to other parts of the body. Those are just some rough statistics there for you. But again, if you're concerned, if you feel a knot, if you see discharge, by all means, go in and see your doctor, get it looked at. Well, Courtland, I can't wait. We've got a great show, a lot to discuss. Take it away.
All right. Well, Michael and Patty, thank you both so much for joining us here today. I know you guys live in the Bronx, but we got together in San Antonio and we're here again. Patty, we're also so happy to see you here. Michael has shared so lovingly how much support you've shared with him through his journey. So, Michael, we really want to get into this and see, you know, how and when were you first diagnosed with male breast cancer?
Sure. Well, first let me thank you both for having Patty and I here today and shining light on male breast cancer awareness. And Dave, thank you for wearing the male breast cancer awareness pin and bracelet. I appreciate that. And you do have a glow about you from that juice cleanse. But my journey began back in 2010. I had been ignoring a lump under my left nipple for several months. And I was going for a routine medical exam. And that medical exam consisted of blood work, a prostate exam, just an overall checkup. And at that point in time, I was kind of embarrassed to talk to my primary care doctor that I had had this lump under my nipple for some time. And stupidly, I didn't say anything to him, and I left that exam saying, you know, maybe I should have said something to the doctor. As it was, he called the next day and spoke with Patty and said that there's something about Michael's blood work. We'd like him to come back in and go do some further tests on his blood. And I went in like 2 days later, and what they wanted to tell me is that I had diabetes. I'd never had been diagnosed with diabetes before, and was trying to wrap my head around that. And it was at that point that I actually got the courage up to tell the doctor that I had a lump under my nipple, because guys are wired differently. We don't usually talk a lot about our personal issues. We don't check ourselves, or our breasts, I should say. You know, we go for routine prostate exams, the doctors check everything, but they never really check our breasts. So it was at that second appointment that I told him about it, and the doctor knew my family history. I had just lost my sister Joanne 2 years earlier to metastatic breast cancer. And for those who don't know, metastatic breast cancer is when the cancer moves from the primary location and spreads through the body. My sister's case was in the brain, the bone, the liver, and unfortunately from her diagnosis, she didn't survive a year.
So, you know, Michael, you make a good point. You say it took you some time to get up the nerve to talk to the doctor about that. Tell me what's going through your mind, and why did it take the nerve? What was behind that?
I think more than anything, I was embarrassed about it because they're breasts, and men don't talk about breasts, and men aren't considered that they have breasts, although we all have breast tissue. We're all mammals, we have breast tissue. Having breast tissue, you are susceptible to developing some sort of breast cancer. And I had never heard of any other guys, you know, having lumps under their nipples, and I really was kind of felt awkward about even talking to it, or even talking to Patty about it for that case.
Now, did you think it's a cyst? I mean, first of all, had you heard of male breast cancer prior to that?
I had never heard of male breast cancer prior to this.
Yeah, and that's why we're here today, because it's such an important topic. And how did you feel? You get this diagnosis, and what goes through your head at that point?
Oh my God! When you know, from just having the lump, it was a process of having a nipple biopsy, first with a needle. They couldn't get anything with the needle. Then they went for what they call a surgical biopsy. The surgical biopsy, they removed a section of this lump, and on December 7th, I went back to the doctor to have just a couple of stitches removed, and that's when he informed me that, sorry to tell you, Michael, but you have breast cancer. And I'm looking at the doctor, I'm looking at Patty. I could see she was already starting to well up because she had more of an understanding, and I'm like, does he know what he's talking about? Does he have my sister's file there? How can I have breast cancer? I'd never heard of it. So I was kind of like in shock at that point in time. And I think I was just kind of zoning out, trying to process it. But looking at Patty, I could see that there was something serious going on, because she was already, you know, in tears, and she's much more familiar with breast cancer. But when they told me I had breast cancer, my only experience was my sister. And my experience with her was that from when she got diagnosed, she was gone within a year. She had lived with me and Patty through her, you know, treatments and everything. And we were driving home in the car, and it was like, oh my, it was silent, but in my head, I'm like, oh my God, I got to get my affairs in order. I got to do this, I got to do that. And we got home in a couple of minutes, and the two of us looked at each other and started hugging and crying, and it was just very emotional. I just feel emotional now talking about it too.
Well, so many times when people have a new diagnosis, or they're curious about maybe a potential health crisis, they turn to the internet right away. And that can be scary and problematic for so many reasons, especially for something so rare as male breast cancer. Did you go to the internet, and what was your experience like with that?
Patty and I both went to the internet, and we started Googling and checking everything. There were no organizations addressing male breast cancer. American Cancer Society hadn't had anything up on their website at that time, and a lot of the other big cancer organizations didn't have anything up on that time. There were some pictures on YouTube of men who had had mastectomies, but other than that, there was no information. And we were scared. We were, what do we do? And Patty got on the phone right away and started working with Sloan Kettering. It's the biggest hospital in our area from the Bronx that deals with cancer, and started giving it my insurance information, all that stuff. So there really was nothing on the internet at that time. This is December 2010.
Mm-hmm.
So, Michael, you mentioned that your sister passed away from breast cancer. Healthy h360 is here because of my sister-in-law's diagnosis with stage 4 breast cancer. How did that diagnosis and her journey with breast cancer begin to affect and shape the way you were thinking now after having received your diagnosis of breast cancer?
I was immediately scared. I was shocked and I was scared because, like I said, I was only familiar with death from breast cancer. I really didn't know anybody else in the community who was a breast cancer survivor or thriver that had been living with breast cancer. So just hearing that and knowing what my sister went through, because my sister, they tried doing gamma knife surgery on her brain to remove some of the tumor, and that turned out to be a nightmare because then she started having strokes in our house. And the morning that she really had a bad stroke, I was on my way to work, and Patty could see it coming on and called me and said, "You better turn around right away, something's going on." And she dialed 911, and she stroked and had to go to the hospital. She couldn't speak, she couldn't eat, she couldn't talk, and then slowly over a couple of days she got a little of that back, and then she had to go for rehab to try to learn a lot of that stuff. But unfortunately, from rehab she ended up going to hospice in the Bronx. So it was super scary.
Mm-hmm.
And Patty, you're going through this journey with your sister-in-law.
Mm-hmm.
And you're watching now. Your profession, you're around cancer quite a bit.
Correct.
So you have a very deep understanding professionally of the disease.
Mm-hmm.
What goes through your mind? Your husband, you just get through you watching your sister-in-law pass away, and now your husband's diagnosed. You've got this background in cancer. Tell me what goes through your mind.
Well, initially you're terrified. I thought at the age of 50 years old I was going to be a widow. And what was I to do without my husband in my life? We've been together since early high school. So my whole life just kind of flashed in front of me, and I just thought, oh God.
Mm-hmm.
I hope that it's not going to be just like what happened with his sister Joanne, because that was it was awful. It was brutal to watch her, the suffering that she had to go through. And I was just fearful for his life.
Yeah.
And I think every prayer I ever knew in my whole entire life was in my head 100 times over, praying just that he would get better.
Yeah.
So we just talked about, turning to the internet and trying to find resources, and unfortunately you guys weren't really able to find anything right away. And one of the biggest issues regarding male breast cancer is feelings of embarrassment and isolation. And so, Michael, we're curious, how did some of those feelings manifest themselves in you, and how long did they last?
Long time.
They manifested right away because as a man being told that you have breast cancer, you're trying to figure out what is wrong with me. Am I a freak? Do I have some sort of women's genes that are creating this? It was shocking at the time to understand that have breast cancer as a male in a female's world. I was raised that women had gotten breast cancer, never heard of a man getting breast cancer, and it was just, like shock and awe. It took quite a while for me to talk about it. I had asked Patty, I said, please don't tell people that I have breast cancer, because I was embarrassed about it. I was still working at the time, and when people had heard I was out and that I had cancer, they'd come up. Everybody wants to ask, what kind of cancer do you have? I couldn't say breast cancer. So if somebody approached me, I said, I had chest cancer. And people would just look and say, oh, okay, chest cancer. And at that point, the conversation would kind of end right there, and I could walk away, going, phew, I dodged that bullet, not having to say that I had breast cancer. And that went on for quite a while. Some of our immediate family members, we had to tell, but most friends and associates, neighbors and stuff, I couldn't do it, couldn't tell them.
And Patty, was this a topic of discussion every night in the house? And, what do we do? Do we talk about it? Do we not call it chest cancer? Do we call it breast cancer? Let's really, face this thing head on. Michael seems like he's a roll up your sleeves, kind of take the bull by the horn kind of guy. How are you feeling through all of this? Are you saying, yeah, I can put myself in his shoes? Men are wired a little differently, and I can see, why he might not be sharing, that he's really has breast cancer with, the local Harley chapter.
Right?
Yeah.
I'm going to say it was more than a year before he would even talk to anybody about it, myself included. It's just something that he didn't want to really talk about. I think because it's always right in your brain, especially with his sister. I think we were both terrified to really talk about it. And then when he kept insisting on saying chest cancer, I finally was like, you cannot say that, because now you're going to have them thinking lung cancer or something else. I said, you need to come to terms with being able to say that you have breast cancer. And he was like, I just can't do it. It's not a guy thing. I can't say it. I'm like, well, you know what? You're going to have to try to get comfortable in that. And then with that, it took a little bit, but he finally got it.
Yeah.
And he's been running with it ever since.
And there you go, with being a pillar of support for your husband,
Yeah.
as he has shared with us.
Mm-hmm.
Michael, I understand you're still undergoing treatment. Can you share with us what the treatment plan was that your doctors developed for you?
Sure. Well, originally I had a mastectomy of the left breast, and they removed the sentinel, non-sentinel nodes. I was lucky enough that they would clear. At that point, you go home wrapped up like a mummy with drain bottles, in your chest, and just I'm trying to think of. I'm blanking out there for a second. Say that question again.
Your treatment plan.
Oh, the treatment plan. So after the mastectomy was a PET scan, full body PET scan, and then based on, I was stage 2B, ductal carcinoma in situ, and they put me on hormone therapy, or endocrine therapy, some people call it. So it's a drug called tamoxifen. I've been taking it for 6 years now. Doctor recommended anywhere from 5 to 10 years. And it has some sucky side effects for men. That could be a whole nother segment to talk about side effects of hormone therapy on men. But it's tough to deal with personally, but for my wife to deal with, she's got to deal with also, because the drug causes anxiety and lack of sexual desire and hot flashes and irritability, and it just goes on and on and on.
So, Michael, you come home, you said you're wrapped up like a mummy, you've got these drain tubes. Take me back to, okay, obviously you've got to change the bandages at some point, and you go home, you're bandaged up, you know that you've had a mastectomy of the breast. What was it like when you first took those bandages off and you looked at yourself in the mirror that first time? What were you thinking?
I think I was avoiding it in the beginning because I didn't want to look to see how bad the damage could be, because, again, the only thing I could find about male breast cancer was some photos on YouTube, which looked like some really bad mastectomy surgeries. But Patty removed the bandages, actually, and when I finally got in front of the mirror, I had looked like a zipper running from the center of my chest to almost under my arm at that point in time, with staples. They just stapled, I think it was 22 staples at the time, and you have the scars from the drain bottles that they have drained in the chest cavity. I think it was a little shocking to see at first, but my male modeling career never took off. So, at the beach, I don't think most people were going to point or look at me, and over time, it's a reminder every day I look in the mirror, but I've come to accept it and love my scar.
Well, it surprises me that the modeling didn't take off. You're a very handsome man.
Well, Michael, Patty has shared with us sort of, how and why she felt it was so important to get you to be comfortable to talk about having male breast cancer. So how did that process kind of work for you specifically? Were you kind of on the same trajectory as her, sort of getting behind it, or did you have a different path?
Well, I could almost pinpoint the time where I had almost like an aha moment. We got a call from a friend who said, "Hey, Mike, there's going to be a show on Katie Couric about male breast cancer." And I was like, "Oh my God, male breast cancer! I have to tune in." So I was sitting in my living room, and Katie Couric show came on. It was a show here in New York City, and here's a young male cancer survivor named Brett Miller. He was only 24 years old, and there was a male breast cancer survivor. His name was Richard Roundtree, and I grew up with Richard Roundtree. He was the movie actor from Shaft, and he was cool. And here I'm seeing Richard Roundtree, cool, and this young guy, Brett, talking about male breast cancer on national TV. And I'm like, oh my God, if these guys can talk about male breast cancer on national TV, what's wrong with me? What am I afraid of? What am I embarrassed about? And man, I think I started doing 360s, no pun intended, with the show, but in my living room, and it was like an epiphany. I got to get out and I got to start talking to people about this. I got to make men aware, because too many men are going through this, and there's no information out there. And it was after that show ended, I got on the phone and called the Katie Couric show, and they had information on how to reach the MaleBreastCancerCoalition.org, and boom, I connected with them, and as Patty said before, we've been off and running.
So, Michael, we have a question from our audience that just came in. So, Paul from Cleveland, Ohio says, "Michael, I too have felt a lump underneath my arm and am very nervous to say anything to anybody about it. Could you give me some words of advice on how to begin to broach the subject?"
Absolutely, absolutely. The first thing I would want to tell him is there's nothing to be embarrassed about. He's not alone. As you stated at the top of the show, over 2,400 men are diagnosed with male breast cancer every year. So there is a population of us out there. Although we're only 1% of the breast cancer population, we exist. And there is organizations out there such as the Male Breast Cancer Coalition, where he can read other men and their stories or their journeys through breast cancer, and that helps people open up and see that they're not alone, and maybe make them not uncomfortable to talk about breast cancer, because it's still not, in headline news where people are talking about it. But he should feel comfortable either talking to his significant other, his healthcare provider, do a self-breast exam to check to see what it is, and at that point, find a doctor, an oncologist, a surgeon, a hospital where you feel comfortable with it. And if you don't feel comfortable with it, maybe go to another place. You have to be comfortable with your team.
So, Patty, I think Michael's a great man and very well-spoken and raising awareness for a very important topic. How does it make you feel now from going from, here was a guy who for a year wouldn't even say the word breast cancer, to see him standing on some of the largest stages out there being an outspoken advocate for male breast cancer?
It's just a totally turnaround attitude that he had, from going to saying nothing to now that he daily, he's on the phone daily, he's on the computer daily, he's inviting into different venues to speak. Many organizations call him up, and he's a public speaker. He's just a go-get-him kind of guy now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, humor can be so important during
very
grave
much.
circumstances. I know you guys have such a great attitude and really good humor surrounding this. Can you sort of take us through some of the humor that you've seen throughout?
Yeah, well, as I started to tell my friends about it, they developed nicknames for me, because if you come from the Bronx, everybody's got a nickname. And some of the new nicknames I developed was Uninip. That was one of the first ones. My other friend called me Zipper because I had the large scar. And you have to find humor in that. I'm taking every day like it's the first day.
Right.
And unfortunately, there's a 30% chance for any early stager like myself to have a reoccurrence, and that's always in the back of your mind. I try not to think about it regularly. I try to plan my life accordingly. And as Patty said, I'll talk to one person on the phone about breast cancer. I'll talk to 13,000 people, as has happened several times in the past with the American Cancer Society at their Making Strides festival. And Dave just mentioned into that one young man who called in. We have a lot of stories still in the works that are coming out. We have over 100 stories on the website, but we just got a 26-year-old young man who diagnosed with breast cancer. So I urge them to go to the Coalition webpage, look at these stories. They'll get more comfortable about it. And if they want to talk to somebody, when they contact the Coalition, there are many people that they'll put them in contact to talk to.
Yeah. So Michael, you go around, you do these speaking engagements. We met, as I mentioned earlier in the show, in San Antonio at SABCS late last year. And you've been fortunate to be given scholarships from associations to come and help be an advocate and spread the word and share your story. Tell me a little about that. I mean, you're now, you go from not speaking about it for a year, from talking about it, and now, really doing great work through scholarship. Tell me about that process a little bit.
Well, scholarships are so important to breast cancer advocates like myself because it is expensive to, fly to a location, be housed at a location, and feed yourself. So myself, I depend a lot on scholarships, and Alamo Breast Cancer Foundation was one of the first ones I had gotten to go to the San Antonio Breast Cancer Symposium, and they're a fantastic organization. And those symposiums are such a wealth of information. It's the only place where you can be face to face with doctors and PhDs and research scientists and hundreds of other breast cancer advocates. And that starts a whole network of sharing stories and people inviting you to come share your story at other places. But wherever they need me to show up, spent days in high schools talking to young students about breast cancer, senior citizen homes, just anywhere where they'll have me, I'm going to show up and talk about it. But there are other scholarships out there, and you seek them out, but word of mouth networking, you hear a lot about scholarships that are coming up, and fantastic way to advocate for breast cancer, especially for me as male breast cancer. It'll usually be me, maybe another male breast cancer, and 50 female patient advocates. So
You gotta like the odds.
the odds are great.
Yeah.
Well, a large part due to your efforts now, the third week of October is recognized as Male Breast Cancer Awareness Week. Can you tell us how that makes you feel?
It was awesome. As a group, the Coalition tries to work with all 50 states to get the third week of October recognized as Male Breast Cancer Awareness Week. And I worked with my local politicians, Michael Benedetto and John Morano were the two in my neighborhood. And we submitted a bill to Governor Cuomo, and he approved it. And it's the second year in a row where he's recognized and gave us a resolution about the third week of October is Male Breast Cancer Awareness Week. And with that comes newspaper interviews, TV interviews, and that just helps us tremendously spread awareness. And not just myself, but other breast cancer brothers around the country are doing things like this. And most recently, from getting that proclamation, Governor Cuomo invited myself to ride with them on our Harleys. As Dave mentioned before, I do a lot of riding, and rode with him on a campaign of Get Screened, No Excuses for men and women in New York State. Longer hours at the hospitals, free mammogram screenings, just a fantastic program. And that just started January 1st this year.
Right.
Well, before we get to the next question, I'm going to jump on my soapbox for a minute because you hit a very significant point. Screening is so important. Now, pay attention, guys. You've got breast too. You are susceptible to breast cancer. So, here's the deal. Self-exams save lives. When you're in the shower soaping it up, soap it up. Reach under those armpits. feel around the nipple. I talked about the signs and symptoms earlier. You got to pay attention. You got to do the self-exam. So Sarah from Chicago, Illinois writes in a question, Patty, for you. She wants to know how Michael's breast cancer has changed your life.
It has changed my life dramatically. You know, in the hustle bustle of living, we don't take the time to breathe. After Michael's diagnoses and that he's doing very, very well, it's every minute of every day is a gift. We're not promised tomorrow, so we just live in the moment, and it just has brought us that much closer. And it's...
She's super supportive. I mean, I'm getting calls for appearances, and Patty comes with me to all of the events, and then she gets to network with, you know, men and women who are breast cancer patients or thrivers, and shares my story and experiences, and it changed her life because where did you come? What did you do at Tops Off with us?
That was a couple of years ago. I was as his wife. I went to this Tops Off on the top of a building here in New York City, and there were, I think it was 9 men. I think
Yes,
there was
we had
9
9 men, I
thrivers
think.
at the time, and all of their significant others, mostly us women, and the women survivors as well. We did this event called Tops Off here in New York City. So the men are facing the cameras, and the women, of course, could not. But our backs were to the cameras, and we were just in front of the Empire State Building on the coldest day of the year, no less.
Topless. What she leaves out is she was topless. She had no idea she would be topless that morning when we went to the event.
A
So
very
she-
good sport.
It was awakening.
She does a lot to support, I have to say.
Well, just as sort of a final question, what sort of advice or messages do you guys have for anyone who is recently diagnosed or thinking they may be about to go down this path?
Take a deep breath.
Yeah.
It's the scariest word you're ever going to hear.
Yeah. You have to be your own best advocate.
Correct.
You have to feel comfortable with the team that you assemble, whether it's your primary doctor, your oncologist, the surgeon, the hospital you're dealing with, the insurance company. There has to be a comfort zone that you're going into this. If you don't like what you hear, go for a second opinion.
Always.
You have to ask a lot of questions and reach out and use the support groups. There's so many support groups out there for women, but for men now also. A lot of major groups now have websites where you can go learn about male breast cancer, and the Male Breast Cancer Coalition.org is a great place to start if you're a man, because they'll put you in contact with another man, such as myself. I've talked with many men over the last couple of weeks recent. As I told you, we have a lot of stories coming out. And as Dave was mentioning with the self-breast exams, link on the Coalition webpage is checkdem.org, which was created by Brett Miller, the founder of the Coalition, which is a video step-by-step on how a man can do a self-breast exam. And as Dave mentioned, in the shower, lather up, feel around, you feel something funny, mention it to your primary care doctor. But discharge, nipple inversion, redness and swelling, inflammation, soreness, all early warning signs that should be looked at and not ignored.
So, Michael, just one last thing. Where does your journey take you next? I know you've got some speaking engagements coming up. So first, let us know where we can find you for those of us who want to come and listen to you speak. And then I want you to give a shout out to some of the organizations that you're partnered with, because they're doing really great work.
Okay, sure. Well, MaleBreastCancerCoalition.org, you can see my story right there. On Twitter, I'm at BronxBorn409. You can follow me on Twitter. I have several speaking engagements coming up at a couple of law firms, but those will be more private. But a lot of the organizations who I depend on, Living Beyond Breast Cancer, Metaviva, Metastatic Breast Cancer Alliance, BCRF Cure, American Cancer Society, all great places to start and look. And another one is FordCares.com. I'm a Ford Warrior and Pink Model of Courage for them. You can also see my story on their website also.
Fantastic. Well, guys, so inspirational. Thanks for helping us shine the spotlight on this important topic. I feel a little choked up here.
Me too.
Uh,
Yeah.
But thanks again for coming in. I'd like to thank you guys for tuning in. I'd like to thank our sponsors for making this all possible. Remember, all of our episodes can be viewed on demand at healthyo360.com, and our podcast can be found in the iTunes Store.
Well, we love social media, and we're all over Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and Pinterest. We use the hashtag #RealStories when posting, and we would greatly appreciate it if you would do the same. On behalf of Dave Duplay, myself, and the entire Healthyo360 family, we'd like to thank you again for joining us today, and we look forward to seeing you again next week.
I never had